I think I'm a pretty decent writer. My English teachers always told me that. So you might think I'd be really pedantic about observing correct grammar, or that I consume and follow a lot of advice from skilled writers, but no. I generally write pretty instinctively, and I phrase things in whatever way seems to best communicate, whatever jam I'm trying to lay down. I don't know if you can write well by trying to follow a bunch of rules and advice intentionally. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to just go over some of my pet peeves when it comes to this stuff. I'm going to start not with a rule, but with a PSA. You can start a sentence with a contraction like and or but. It's not a real grammar rule that you can't do that, but people think it is for some reason. If you can tack a clause onto the previous sentence after a comma, then you don't need to start a new sentence with a contraction, but you can if you want to. Next, a minor style point that really grinds my gears. In the American variant of English, when you quote someone, you put what is said in double quotes. However, when the quote appears as part of a larger sentence and needs to be delineated by commas, for some reason we're taught to put the commas inside the double quotes, even though they're not part of the quotation. "I'm not going," she said, versus "I'm not going," she said. I can't stand this. It's a rule I follow when I submit formal writing for other people's use, but it's not a rule I follow in my own writing and notes because it's dumb. It's really dumb. I've heard that it literally dates back to printing press days, where doing this reduced the tendency for the comma blocks in the press to slip out of place or something, and Americans were just too lazy to deal with it, and they decided to rewrite English. F that. I actually intentionally broke this rule out of spite. In my school papers, I'd put the commas outside the quotes on purpose, and my teachers would take off points, but I refused to do it the right way because the right way is wrong. I got A's in English class anyway, so nothing lost. A thing more specific to me is word repetition. A common piece of advice you get is that you shouldn't use the same word over and over again, and if you find yourself doing this, you should consider pulling out a thesaurus and changing some instances of things to vary, your writing up a bit. This is partly a style choice, but in general, I think that that's just bad advice. You can wonder if you're using the best word or if there's a similar word that better communicates what you mean. But if you're using the correct word, then changing it is just misleading. Like, if I'm talking about Sally and what Sally did yesterday and what Sally's going to do tomorrow, am I going to say, "Wow, that's boring. Let me change her name to Angela sometime so the reader doesn't get bored"? What? Now that's a contrived example. Any sane person would switch to calling Sally, she, her pretty quickly, but then you would be repeating those words instead. I think repetition is frequently less distracting and annoying than if you pointlessly trade between synonyms. For example, when writing dialogue, you should really stick to appending "she said" and "they said" rather than trying to be too clever with, "he exclaimed," "she ejaculated," and nonsense like that. The reader will just subconsciously start to ignore words that are repeated, which just lets them read faster. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so here's an easy one. It's the rule about listing yourself second when grouping yourself with another person. For example, "Me and Hitler don't have much in common." Oh, I'm sorry. Hitler and I don't have much in common. This has nothing to do with language or being clear. It's just enforcing a certain, at times questionable, standard of morality in a context that it doesn't belong in. Moving on. A more advanced point involves the distinction between active and passive voice. So, for example, "the light was left on at night" is passive because the subject is unspecified. The traditional wisdom is that you should prefer to write in the active voice because people like that, supposedly. An active voice rewrite of "the light was left on last night" is "someone left the light on last night." It should go without saying that version is a bit accusatory and thus actually means a different thing. And so you can't just inject subject words into sentences to make them active. And honestly, that often just makes things wordier anyway. You should use what works. And I'm going to end with another trope from English class. It's the emphasis on considering the purpose of your writing. Like, are you writing to inform, to persuade, to entertain? That's not a real distinction, in my opinion. You're always writing to inform. You should always try to communicate clearly and logically, but you should employ humor whenever it helps and break rules wherever it helps. Even in formal writing, if you're funny and subtle enough, people will let informality and jokes slide in spite of it not being allowed. If you're writing fiction and you have a bunch of implausible stuff and plot holes in your work, it's not going to be entertaining. Clear information doesn't need to be dry and academic. Have you ever heard the phrase, it's funny because it's true? If you're entertaining and clear, you can be more persuasive. And art and propaganda always convey truths about human nature and psychology. So these things are all linked. Making up these artificial categories just encourages you to miss opportunities to use all the tools of language to your advantage. If the truth works, use the truth. If pretentious erudite diction of the academy works, use that. If humor works, tell a joke, Don't tie one arm behind your back for no reason. That's a good rule for writing and a good rule for life.